The sky above Northumberland was the color of pewter, heavy and waiting, as the carriage rolled through the mist-choked countryside. Each turn of the wheels seemed to echo like a heartbeat in the silence, and inside the carriage, Lady Evelina Grace sat perfectly still, her gloved hands folded over a small velvet box resting in her lap. The rhythm of the road jostled her gently, but her gaze never left the window. The gray fields, the skeletal trees, the wild moor stretching to the horizon. Every mile brought her closer to Ashbourne Manor, and every mile deepened the ache in her chest. The box was no heavier than a few ounces, yet it felt like it contained an entire lifetime. Inside lay a simple gold ring, delicate but unyielding, engraved with the letters E and N entwined like ivy. 2 years ago, Nathaniel Ashbourne, the Duke she once loved with her whole heart, had slipped it onto her finger and promised her forever. But forever had shattered like glass under the weight of deceit. She still remembered that dreadful morning, the letter on her dressing table, its words like poison. He has chosen another. The wind howled around the carriage like some restless spirit. Evelina's reflection flickered in the glass, pale skin, tired eyes, hair the color of chestnut silk pulled into a modest knot. Grief had aged her, though she was not yet 24. The woman who had once laughed in the gardens of Ashbourne now sat cloaked in mourning black, her beauty tempered by sorrow and silence. As the carriage crested the final hill, she caught sight of the manor rising from the fog, vast, ancient, and solemn. It seemed less like a home than a fortress, its tall windows shuttered against the world, its stone facade veiled in ivy and shadow, a place where time itself had stopped the day she left. "Almost there, my lady," the driver murmured through the panel. She gave a faint nod, though her throat was too tight to speak. What words could she offer? That she had come to return a ring, and perhaps to bury a heart that had never truly stopped bleeding? When the carriage came to a halt, the iron gates loomed before her, crowned with the Ashbourne crest, a phoenix rising from fire. She stepped out, her boots sinking into the wet gravel. The air was sharp with the scent of rain and sea salt. A single servant approached, Mrs. Linton, the housekeeper, older now but unmistakable. Her expression faltered when she saw Evelina, the flicker of surprise quickly masked by formality. "Lady Evelina," Mrs. Linton said softly, "His Grace will be informed of your arrival. He, was not expecting you." "I know," Evelina whispered, holding up the velvet box. "I only came to return what was his." The housekeeper's eyes softened with something between pity and understanding. "Some things, my lady, are not so easily returned." Inside, Ashbourne Manor was colder than she remembered. The grand entrance hall smelled faintly of smoke and lemon oil, the marble floors polished to a ghostly gleam. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch her, ancestors of the Ashbourne line, proud and stern. Yet her gaze lingered only on one painting. Nathaniel, captured in his younger days, standing by a window, sunlight touching his face. The artist had painted him with eyes full of life. The man she remembered had once smiled that way, open, tender, unguarded. She tore her eyes away, but the ache deepened. The servant led her to a drawing room lit by a single fire. Evelina stood before it, letting her gloved fingers trace the rim of the box. She rehearsed what she would say when he came. "Your Grace, I came only to return this. I ask for nothing more. Simple, dignified, final." But when the door finally opened, her breath caught, because the man who stepped through it was both familiar and changed beyond words. Nathaniel Ashbourne had once been the epitome of elegance, tall, graceful, with eyes like clear stormlight. Now he looked like a shadow of that man. His dark hair was flecked with silver at the temples, his face marked by a thin scar running from his jaw to his collar. He carried the weight of grief in every movement. "Lady Evelina," he said, his tone smooth but devoid of warmth, "to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Her fingers trembled slightly around the box. "I came to return what is yours." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick, suffocating. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Nathaniel's gaze flicked to the box, then back to her face. "I never asked you to return it," he said quietly. And though his words were calm, Something in his voice, some trembling edge, made her realize that perhaps after all this time, neither of them had truly let go. Nathaniel stood still for a long moment after she spoke, as though her presence itself had disrupted the rhythm of the air. The rain outside pressed against the windows, whispering against the glass like an old ghost reminding him of what once was. The firelight threw shifting shadows across his face, and Evelina, watching him, could not tell whether he was the same man she once loved or a stranger carved from grief. He looked older, not merely in years but in spirit. The Duke of Ashbourne had once been known for his charm, a man whose laughter could brighten the grandest of halls. But the Nathaniel who stood before her now carried silence like armor. The lines around his mouth were sharper, his jaw tense, as though he were holding back an emotion that threatened to betray him. Evelina's eyes flickered to the scar along his jaw, thin, pale, but impossible to miss. It hadn't been there before. She wanted to ask how he'd gotten it, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "You've changed." His gaze lifted, steady and cool. War has a way of doing that. The words struck her like a stone dropped into still water. She remembered, hearing rumors that after their engagement had fallen apart, Nathaniel had left England to fight in the Continental Wars, seeking glory or perhaps punishment. She had imagined him surrounded by cannon smoke, riding through chaos with death on his heels, and she had prayed every night for his safety, even when she thought he despised her. Now he stood before her, living proof that prayers were sometimes cruel. They were answered, but never gently. He crossed the room, slow and deliberate, until only the fire separated them. "So," he said finally, "you came all this way to return a ring." Evelina nodded, her composure trembling. "Yes. It seemed wrong to keep it." He tilted his head slightly. "Wrong or painful?" Her lips parted, but she could not form an answer. Nathaniel's eyes softened for the briefest second, a flicker, gone as soon as it appeared. "It was never about the ring, Evelina," he said quietly. "You know that." She swallowed, her heart pounding. "Perhaps not, but it's the only piece of you I had left." The fire cracked loudly, startling them both. The room felt smaller, as if the walls themselves leaned in to listen. "You could have written," he said suddenly. His voice was low, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. "You could have told me why you left, why you disappeared as though our vows meant nothing." "I thought you had chosen another." The words burst from her, sharper than she intended. "I found your letter, the one saying you'd accepted Lady Clarice's hand. What was I supposed to think?" Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "What letter?" Her breath caught. "The letter on my dressing table the morning after the ball. It bore your seal. It said—" She stopped herself, shaking her head as though trying to erase the memory. "It doesn't matter now." But he stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing. "It does matter, because I never wrote such a thing." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt. The air thickened. The fire hissed. Evelina stared at him, her pulse hammering in disbelief. "You... what?" He held her gaze, and for the first time since she had entered the room, she saw the raw truth in his eyes, pain, confusion, and something dangerously close to regret. "I never wrote to you, Evelina," he said softly. "I searched for you for months after you left. Every letter I sent came back unopened. I thought you wanted nothing more to do with me." Her gloved hands trembled. "Then someone wanted us apart." "Someone succeeded," he said bitterly. The weight of those words pressed between them. The storm outside roared, shaking the windows in their frames, but neither moved. The truth, long buried, had begun to stir, and with it came the ghost of everything they had lost. At last, Nathaniel turned away, walking toward the window where the reflection of the fire flickered across the rain-streaked glass. "You shouldn't have come back," he murmured. "Some wounds only bleed again when touched." Evelina stood motionless, her heart breaking anew. "Then why didn't you take the ring?" she asked softly. He glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Because," he said, his voice low and steady, "as long as you held it, I could pretend there was still something worth keeping." And in that moment, beneath the low thunder and flickering flame, she understood. The Duke, who had claimed to forget her, had, in truth, never stopped waiting. The fire had burned low, its light barely touching the far corners of the drawing room. Yet, in that dim, flickering glow, Evelina could see the man Nathaniel once had been, the man she'd fallen hopelessly in love with. It felt impossible that only 2 years separated the present from the past. The distance between them felt like lifetimes. Her gaze drifted toward the portrait above the mantel, an oil painting of Ashbourne Manor in its prime, the gardens lush, the lake shimmering beneath the sunlight. She remembered that lake. She remembered laughter, warmth, the soft brush of Nathaniel's hand against hers as they had walked its edge. It was there, among the roses and willows, that he had first told her she had changed his world. The memory unfolded before her now, vivid and cruel. It had been early summer, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle. Evelina had come to Ashbourne as a guest of her aunt, invited for the season's grand masquerade ball. She had not been beautiful like the others, not like the dazzling daughters of titled families who fluttered around Nathaniel Ashbourne, hoping for his favor. She was quiet, unremarkable, and her dowry was modest at best. But Nathaniel had seen her first, not in the ballroom, but in the gardens, seated by the fountain with a book in her lap. "You hide from your own celebration," he'd teased, stepping out from the shadows of the hedge maze. She had looked up, startled, then smiled shyly. "I think it's less hiding, Your Grace, and more surviving." He had laughed, that easy musical laugh she'd never forgotten, and sat beside her, ignoring propriety entirely. The conversation that followed had stretched far beyond dusk. By the time the lanterns were lit and the first notes of music floated through the open windows, she realized she had stopped being afraid of him. Over the weeks that followed, Nathaniel found excuses to seek her company. Long rides along the cliffs, quiet mornings in the library, moments stolen from the gaze of society. He had been everything a duke was not expected to be, kind, curious, unguarded. When he first took her hand at the midsummer fete, the whole of Northumberland had whispered. When he asked for her hand 1 week later, the whispers became scandal. Yet he had silenced them all with one sentence spoken before a crowd. "If love makes me a fool, then let me be the proudest fool in Shotbanno, England." Her father had been overjoyed. Her aunt nearly fainted from the shock. And Evelina, she had believed in the fairy tales she once mocked, until that morning. The letter had arrived before dawn, placed neatly on her vanity with Nathaniel's crest pressed into the wax. Her hands had trembled as she broke the seal, expecting another tender note, some romantic promise of their future together. But the words had torn her world apart. "My dearest Evelina, you have been kind beyond measure, yet my heart no longer belongs where it once did. Forgive me, but I have chosen Lady Clarice. May you find peace in another's arms. Nathaniel Ashbourne." She had read it a dozen times, refusing to believe until the ink blurred with her tears. That evening, she left. No explanations, no farewell, only a letter of her own that was never delivered. Now, standing in the same room where he had once sworn eternity, Evelina felt the pain of that day all over again. Nathaniel turned from the window, as if sensing the storm of memory in her silence. "You're thinking of the past," he said quietly. She nodded. "I can't seem to stop." He studied her, the shadows deepening around his eyes. "Nor can I. The past doesn't fade, Evelina. It waits. It waits in the halls, in the dust, in every song the wind carries through this cursed house." She drew a trembling breath. "You loved me once." He flinched, barely, but she saw it. "Once?" His voice was hoarse. "If I could hate you, perhaps I could rest, but I never learned how." For a moment the world stood still. The storm outside quieted to a soft patter. The fire crackled low. Evelina wanted to speak, to say everything her heart screamed, that she never stopped loving him, that she had been deceived, that she had kept the ring not as a relic, but as a promise she still believed in. But pride, that cruel, fragile pride, held her still. So instead, she whispered, "Perhaps it's better if we both learn to forget." Nathaniel's lips curved, not into a smile, but something closer to sorrow. "And yet," he said, "you came back." Her eyes met his, shimmering with tears. "Yes," she said softly, "but only to return what should never have been mine." That night the corridors of Ashbourne Manor breathed with secrets. The storm had faded into a restless drizzle, and the house settled into uneasy silence, the kind of silence that wasn't absence of sound, but the echo of something unsaid. Evelina lay awake in the guest chamber of the east wing, staring at the cracked ceiling where candlelight danced in trembling patterns. The faint smell of lavender lingered in the linens, mixed with the cold scent of stone. It was a room prepared for strangers, impersonal, untouched, yet she could feel eyes watching her, not in malice but in memory. Outside, a draft whispered beneath the door, carrying the sighs of the manor. She could hear the grandfather clock, in the distant hall striking midnight, each chime rolling through the corridors like a heartbeat. Sleep would not come. Her mind was full of faces, Nathaniel's eyes as he had spoken those final words, the shadowed portrait of the man he used to be, the flickering flame between them that refused to die. Finally, unable to bear the weight of stillness, Evelina rose from the bed and wrapped herself in a wool shawl. The air bit at her skin as she opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The corridors of Ashbourne stretched long and dim, lit only by the glow of dying candles. Her slippers brushed softly against the carpets, the silence so deep it seemed to listen. She passed portraits whose painted eyes followed her, generations of Ashbournes who looked down with cold judgment. The walls themselves seemed heavy with sorrow. She paused at one painting, a woman in a pale blue gown, her hand resting on a piano, her eyes hauntingly familiar. The brass plate beneath read, "Lady Amelia Ashbourne, 1791-1820, Nathaniel's mother." Evelina remembered hearing she had died young, of fever, they said, but in the portrait's gaze there was something more, a loneliness that mirrored her own. As she moved deeper into the east wing, the air grew colder. The manor was ancient, built upon layers of history, stone upon sorrow. She turned a corner and found herself before a closed door. The faintest glimmer of light spilled from beneath it. Something, curiosity or perhaps fate, drew her closer. She pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room beyond was a music room, long abandoned. Dust sheets covered most of the furniture, but the grand piano stood uncovered near the window, its ivory keys gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Cobwebs shimmered like silver threads along the curtains. Evelina stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat. It was the same piano she had played once, the night before their engagement, when Nathaniel had asked her to play the song she'd composed for him. She could still hear it, the soft melody, his laughter, the way he'd stood beside her and whispered, "You make even silence sing." Her hand trembled as she reached toward the piano. The first note she pressed was barely audible, brittle and ghostly, but alive. Behind her the floor creaked. She froze, heart pounding, and turned slowly. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, his dark silhouette framed by the flickering light of a candle. His expression was unreadable, not anger, but something far more dangerous. "I told you this room was never to be entered," he said quietly. Evelina lowered her hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "You knew," he interrupted, his voice rough. "You knew this was hers." "Hers?" Evelina echoed, then saw it, the faint traces of another life scattered through the room, a shawl draped over a chair, a dried bouquet on the windowsill. The faint scent of perfume that time hadn't erased. Nathaniel stepped closer, his gaze locked on the piano. "It belonged to my mother," he said softly. "She died in this room. They said the fever took her, but I think it was something else. She used to play every night, even when she was too weak to stand. After she died, I couldn't bear to hear another note." Evelina's heart tightened. "And yet," she whispered, "you still keep her piano uncovered." His eyes flickered to hers. "Because I can't bring myself to cover it either." Silence. The kind that held the weight of two souls standing too close to the past. She took a cautious step forward, her voice trembling. "Music isn't what took her from you, Nathaniel. It's what kept her alive. Perhaps that's why you've never stopped hating it, because it reminds you of how much you loved her." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, he replied, "And you think love is a cure for pain?" Evelina looked down at the piano keys. No, she whispered, but sometimes it's the only thing that makes pain worth surviving. The candlelight flickered between them, fragile, trembling, but unbroken. Nathaniel turned his gaze toward the window, his reflection blurred against the rain-streaked glass. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but his voice had lost its edge. "I know," Evelina said, stepping back toward the door. "And yet here we are." When she left, the Duke remained standing by the piano, staring at the keys her fingers had just touched. And when the wind sighed through the cracks of the old house, it carried the faintest echo of a melody long forgotten, the kind that could wake ghosts or hearts. By the time Evelina returned to her chamber, the storm had awakened again. The rain fell like shards of glass against the window panes, and thunder rumbled through the bones of the old manor. Sleep, once again, was impossible. The air itself seemed restless, charged with the kind of energy that precedes confession or destruction. Somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. She rose, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. When she opened her door, the corridor was dimly lit by the erratic glow of candles struggling against the draft. "Lady Evelina," the voice came from behind her. She turned, startled, and there he was. Nathaniel Ashbourne, Duke of Ashbourne, stood in the half-dark, his expression unreadable, his hair damp with rain. He was holding a decanter and 2 glasses. "You're awake," he said quietly. Evelina nodded. "The storm, it doesn't let one rest, does it?" he finished. His tone was even, but there was something unsteady beneath it. "Come downstairs. The fire's still lit. I would rather not drink alone tonight." For a moment she hesitated, but there was something in his eyes. Not command, but invitation. And perhaps, she thought, some part of her had waited 2 years for this moment. They went down together, the thunder punctuating their silence. In the library, the fire burned low but steady, casting the room in amber light. Shelves rose high into the shadows, filled with the scent of leather and dust, old wisdom and forgotten things. Nathaniel poured a measure of brandy into each glass and handed one to her. "To old ghosts," he said, raising his glass slightly. She managed a faint smile. "And to what's left of the living." Their glasses touched. The fire crackled. Outside, lightning turned the windows white for a fleeting second, and then the world fell quiet again, save for the rain's whispering fury. Nathaniel set his glass down and leaned against the mantel, his profile outlined in gold. "You were in the music room," he said. "Yes," Evelina admitted softly. "I didn't mean to intrude." His gaze stayed on the flames. "My mother loved that room. My father despised it. He said it made her weak. But I think it was the only thing that made her feel alive." He turned then, eyes finding hers. "Do you ever wonder if love and ruin are the same thing, Evelina?" She blinked, caught off guard. "No," she said after a moment. "Ruin comes when love is taken for granted." His jaw tightened. "And yet love always costs more than it gives." "Then why keep it at all?" "Because," he said softly, "without it, there's nothing left worth saving." The silence between them deepened, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken things. The firelight painted her face in shades of gold and shadow, and for the first time since her return, Nathaniel allowed himself to truly look at her. She was changed, yes, tempered, wiser, her beauty quieter now, her strength in the way she carried her scars unseen. He had once thought he'd forgotten her voice, her laughter, the way she tilted her head when she spoke, and yet every small detail came rushing back, sharp as glass. Evelina felt his gaze and turned away, setting her glass aside. "You said earlier you never wrote the letter." "I didn't," he said. "I swear it." "Then who?" He hesitated. "Perhaps my cousin, Lady Clarice. She always had ambitions far greater than her conscience." Evelina's hands clenched. "I thought she was your friend." "She was," Nathaniel said bitterly, "until I told her I intended to marry you. Her jealousy was vicious, though I didn't see it then." Evelina exhaled, her heart twisting. "She destroyed us both." "No," he said, shaking his head. "We destroyed ourselves by believing her." The words struck deep. They were truth and confession both. The fire crackled louder as if stirred by their pain. Evelina's voice trembled. "I left because I thought you no longer loved me." "And I went to war," he said, stepping closer, Because I thought you never did. Their eyes met, two storms colliding in the glow of a dying fire. Do you still hate me? She whispered. Nathaniel's voice dropped to something fragile, almost human. I never hated you. Only myself, for letting you go. The thunder broke again, but this time neither flinched. The distance between them dissolved as memory and longing blurred into something dangerously alive. Evelina took a step back, as if afraid of what might come next. We can't change what's been lost. Nathaniel's expression softened. No, he said, but perhaps we can choose not to lose it again. And in that single moment, beneath the rain beside the fire, the ghosts of the past began to burn away, leaving behind something raw, uncertain, but undeniably real. The fire burned lower, reduced to glowing embers that painted the library in copper and shadow. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm, a lullaby for the sleepless. Evelina sat in silence, her thoughts tangled between past and present. In her lap rested the velvet box, its edges worn smooth by years of being opened and closed, of almost letting go, but never quite. Nathaniel stood by the mantel, staring into the flames as though the answers he sought might rise from the ashes. His hands were clasped behind his back, the tension in his shoulders betraying the calm in his voice. So, he said quietly, this is what you came for. Evelina hesitated. Her fingers traced the soft curve of the box. Yes, she whispered, it's the reason I returned. Then open it, he said, turning to face her. Her pulse stuttered. She hadn't expected him to ask. Slowly, she lifted the lid. Inside, the gold ring lay where it always had, catching the faint light like a drop of sunlight frozen in time. Nathaniel's breath caught, imperceptibly, but she saw it. He stepped forward, the firelight reflecting in his eyes, making them look almost molten. It hasn't changed, he said softly. No, Evelina murmured, but everything else has. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level. The space between them was small, no more than a breath, but it felt like a chasm of 2 years, filled with words never spoken. You kept it, he said. All this time. I tried not to, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought returning it would make it easier. That maybe if I let it go, I could stop wondering whether you ever thought of me. Nathaniel's lips curved in a sad smile. And did you? She looked down. Every day. The confession hung between them like smoke. Nathaniel reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the box. Do you know why I had this ring made? Evelina shook her head, afraid that speaking would break whatever fragile peace they stood in. It wasn't just a promise, he said. It was a reminder of the day I met you by the fountain. You were reading some dreadful novel, pretending not to notice me watching you. I wasn't pretending, she said softly. He smiled faintly. Then I must have been the fool who imagined it. I had this ring crafted that same week. I wanted it to be simple, not the kind of thing society expects, but something that would last, like the way you made me feel. Honest, unadorned, real. Evelina's vision blurred with tears. And yet it didn't last. No, he said, his voice trembling, because I failed to trust what was real. For a moment, neither moved. The world was reduced to 2 people and the small circle of light around them. Evelina took the ring in her palm, the metal cold against her skin. You should take it back, she said. Nathaniel looked at her, and for the first time that night, his composure cracked. And what would I do with it? Hide it away like another ghost? It belongs to you, she said. His voice lowered, rough and unsteady. No, Evelina, it belongs to us. It always did. Her breath trembled. Then why does it hurt to look at it? Because it still means something, he said simply. A long silence followed. The storm outside had quieted entirely, replaced by the soft sigh of wind through the chimney. The flicker of firelight caught the gold of the ring, making it glow between them like a heartbeat. Evelina closed her fingers around it and stood. I don't know what you want from me, Nathaniel. He rose too, his gaze searching hers. The truth. I've already given it. Not all of it, he said, stepping closer. You say you came to return the ring, but that's not why you're here. You came because you couldn't live with not knowing. because some part of you still believes in what we were." She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the words refused to come. Her silence was its own confession. Nathaniel's voice softened. "You still love me." Evelina's hand trembled, the ring glinting between her fingers. "And if I do?" she whispered. He looked at her for a long, aching moment, then said quietly, "Then perhaps it's time you stopped running from it." The fire crackled once more, sending sparks into the air, tiny stars that vanished as quickly as they were born. Evelina's eyes filled, not with despair, but with the first flicker of something she had long buried. Hope. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy, alive, the kind of silence that follows a confession too fragile to touch. The fire had dimmed to embers, its light pulsing faintly across their faces. Outside, the last of the storm sighed against the windows, leaving behind a silence that seemed almost sacred. Then Nathaniel turned away, his hands flexing at his sides. "Do you know what it was like?" he said, his voice low, measured, too measured. "To wake up every day and hate myself for believing you could betray me? To convince myself that the woman I loved was capable of deceit, just so I could make the pain tolerable?" Evelina stood, motionless. "And do you know what it was like," she whispered, "to read those words, to see your seal on that letter, and feel my entire world disappear?" He faced her again, his jaw tight. "You could have come to me. You could have come to me," she shot back, the words trembling with years of restraint finally breaking free. "You were the one with power, with position, with every means to find the truth. I was cast out by rumor, by lies, and still I waited for you to fight for me. But you didn't." Nathaniel flinched, his expression cracking like porcelain. "I did fight for you," he said, his voice rough. "You just weren't there to see it. I tore apart every letter, every whisper, every name that might have led me to you. And when I found nothing, I turned to war, because it was the only kind of pain I could control." The room trembled under the weight of their voices. Evelina took a step forward, her eyes glistening with defiance and sorrow. "And what did that war give you, Nathaniel? Glory? Redemption? Or just another scar to add to the ones you refused to show?" His hand went unconsciously to the mark on his jaw. The firelight caught the edge of it, pale against his skin. "It gave me silence," he said finally. "A world where I didn't have to remember your voice." "Then why do you look at me as if you've been waiting to hear it again?" The words slipped from her lips before she could stop them. They landed between them like a spark to dry tinder. Nathaniel froze, his chest rose and fell unevenly. "Because I have," he said, and his voice broke. "Every night I've heard it in dreams, in the echo of the wind, in the whisper of the rain. You haunt me, Evelina. You've haunted me since the day you left." Evelina's throat tightened. "And you think I haven't been haunted too? Every time I saw the sun set, I thought of that garden, of your hand in mine, and I wondered how something so real could vanish so completely." Nathaniel stepped closer, and she didn't retreat. "Then why come back now?" "Because," she said softly, "I couldn't carry the weight of your memory anymore. I needed to set it down." He exhaled, slow and shaking. "And if I don't want you to?" Evelina's eyes glistened. "Then that isn't mercy, Nathaniel. That's selfishness." For a heartbeat they stood inches apart, breath mingling, both trembling from the force of everything unsaid. Nathaniel's voice dropped, barely audible. "I've lived every day believing you no longer loved me. Tell me now, and I'll believe whatever truth you give me, even if it kills me." Her lips parted, and the words came like a prayer torn from the heart. "I never stopped." The silence that followed was absolute, not the silence of distance, but the silence that comes before something breaks. Nathaniel's hand found hers, almost without thought, the ring, still warm, from her grasp, pressed between their palms. "You think love is forgiveness," he whispered, "but love is the wound that never heals, and somehow I'd rather bleed from you than live without you." Evelina's tears fell freely now, glimmering in the dim light. "Then you've been bleeding for us both." The fire flared suddenly, a burst of orange and gold that lit the room in fleeting brilliance, as if the house itself had been holding its breath and now exhaled. Nathaniel's composure shattered. His voice trembled, rough with desperation. "Why didn't you send word? Why didn't you let me find you?" "Because I was afraid," she cried. "Afraid that if you saw me again, you would hate me for ever believing that lie." He closed the distance between them. "And if I tell you I never stopped loving you, even through the hatred, even through the silence, would that make you stay?" Evelina looked up at him, tears catching the light. "No," she whispered, "but it might make me forgive myself." Nathaniel's hand trembled as he brushed her cheek, a touch hesitant, reverent, full of the years that separated them. And in that moment, as rain traced the windows and the last ember cracked in the hearth, both of them understood that love was not something time could bury. It only waited, quiet, patient, burning beneath the ashes. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the trembling of the windows and the scent of rain still clinging to the air. The library had grown colder, the last embers dimming to a dull red glow. Yet, within that fading warmth stood the two of them, close enough to touch but still divided by years of silence. Nathaniel turned away first, his back to her, his hand gripping the mantel as though he needed the stone to keep from unraveling. The firelight cast his shadow long across the wall, stretching like something half human, half memory. "I used to think time would erase you," he said quietly, "that if I buried myself in duty, in war, in anything but this, I might forget the sound of your voice. But it never left me. You never left me." Evelina's eyes softened, but she said nothing. "I carried your letter with me into every battle," he continued, his tone trembling between bitterness and longing. "Not the forged one, the last one you sent, the one I never opened. It came back to me months later, sealed and stained with rain. I kept it anyway. I told myself I hated you. I told myself I would throw it into the fire one day, but I couldn't. Even hating you, I couldn't let you go." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small folded envelope, the edges worn, the ink faded. Evelina's breath caught. "That can't be." "It is," he said softly, turning it over in his hand. "Your handwriting, your words, never read." Her heart ached at the sight of it. "I wrote to tell you the truth," she whispered, "that I loved you, that I believed someone had forged that letter in your name, that I—" She broke off, the words catching on tears. "I sent it the night I left." Nathaniel's expression crumbled. "I know. I found it too late." He pressed the letter against his chest, then met her gaze. "When I realized what had happened, I'd already gone to war. I thought I could silence you by surrounding myself with noise, cannon fire, screams, orders shouted into smoke. But even then, every night, when the battle ended and the world went still, I'd see your face in the quiet." Evelina's voice trembled. "You went to war to forget me." "No," he said. "I went to war to remember who I was before you, and discovered that man no longer existed." He moved closer, the distance between them shrinking until she could feel the warmth of his breath against her skin. "Do you know what they called me on the front lines?" he asked. She shook her head, eyes shining. "The Ghost Duke," he said with a bitter smile, "because I never spoke unless I had to, because I never celebrated victories, because I carried a woman's name in my locket instead of a saint's. You were my sin, Evelina, and my salvation." Her tears fell freely now, slipping down her cheeks like silver in the firelight. "Then why didn't you come home sooner?" He looked at her, and for a moment, all the pride, the anger, the restraint dissolved. "Because I was afraid I would find you happy without me." Evelina's breath caught. "And now?" "Now I'm afraid that I've forgotten how to live without you." He reached into his pocket again and drew out a small chain. At its end hung his half of the ring, worn, dented, yet gleaming faintly in the light. "I never took it off," he said softly, "not even when I thought you hated me. I couldn't, because it reminded me that once, even for a moment, you were mine." Evelina's trembling fingers brushed the ring, and for the first time she saw how much he had carried her ghost, in the hollows beneath his eyes, in the way he stood too still as though afraid the ground might shift again. She whispered, "Nathaniel, You're not the same man I left." "No," he said, his voice breaking. "That man died the day you did. I've been living with your absence ever since." The words pierced her heart with equal parts pain and tenderness. Slowly, as if led by instinct rather than thought, she reached out and touched his cheek, tracing the scar that marked him. "And this?" she asked softly. "A reminder," he said, "that not all wounds heal. Some simply stop bleeding." Evelina's hand lingered there, the warmth of her touch stirring something buried deep within him. "You survived," she whispered. He nodded faintly. "I did, but I never lived." The quiet between them deepened until it was no longer silence, but understanding. A fragile bridge spanning the years that had kept them apart. Nathaniel took her hand and pressed his forehead to her knuckles. "If I could go back, I would tear down every wall, silence every lie, just to have one more day with you." Evelina's tears fell onto his hand. "Then take this one," she whispered, and for the first time in years the Duke of Ashbourne closed his eyes, not in pain but in peace. The storm clouds had scattered by morning, leaving Ashbourne Manor bathed in a pale, hesitant light. The sky outside the library windows glowed silver blue, the color of renewal. Smoke drifted lazily from the dying fire, and the air smelled faintly of brandy, rain, and something softer, forgiveness. Evelina stood by the window, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her eyes traced the horizon where the sea met the sky, endless, unbroken, free. She had spent the night in restless quiet, turning over Nathaniel's words again and again in her mind. Every confession, every tremor in his voice, every look that had spoken what neither of them dared to say aloud. Behind her the floorboards creaked softly. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. She could feel his presence the way one feels sunlight before it touches the skin, familiar, steady, unspoken. "You didn't sleep," he said gently. She smiled faintly. "Neither did you." Nathaniel stopped a few paces behind her. He looked older than the man she had once loved, but it was the kind of age that spoke of survival, not decay. His eyes, though tired, carried a warmth that hadn't been there before, something fragile, something hopeful. "I kept thinking," he said quietly, "how easily we could have lost this, all of it, to pride and silence." Evelina turned, her gaze meeting his. "We did lose it." "Yes," he admitted, "but perhaps some things can be found again." She looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time in 2 years she didn't see the Duke, the title, or the man wrapped in grief. She saw Nathaniel, the boy who had once followed her laughter through rose gardens, who had written her name in the margins of his letters, who had believed love could conquer anything. And maybe, she thought, it still could. He stepped closer. The space between them felt like the fragile edge of something sacred. In his hands, he held the velvet box, open now, the gold ring resting against the dark lining. "I told you once," he began softly, "that this ring was not meant to bind but to remind, of a love born from honesty, not expectation." Evelina's breath trembled, and yet honesty was what we lost. "Then let us find it again," he said. He lowered himself to one knee. The gesture was not practiced or regal. It was raw, human, a man stripped of all pride, kneeling not as a duke, but as a soul laid bare. Evelina's hand flew to her mouth, a sound escaping her that was half gasp, half sob. "Evelina Grace," he said, his voice unsteady, "I asked you once to wear this as a promise. Then I let it become a burden. But tonight, after everything, I ask you to wear it as something else." She swallowed, tears shimmering in her eyes. "As what?" "As forgiveness," he said simply. "Not for what I did, but for what I failed to do, for every day I didn't fight for you, for every word I didn't say." The air trembled around them. Evelina felt her knees weaken beneath the weight of it all, the tenderness, the sorrow, the impossible beauty of his repentance. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "No," Nathaniel said, standing slowly, taking her hand in his. "You don't deserve my pain. You deserve peace, and I want to be part of it, if you'll let me." The words cracked something open inside her. All the walls she had built, all the years she had armored her heart with bitterness and silence, they fell away, piece by fragile piece. What remained was simple and unbearably true. "I came here to end it," she said softly, "to give back what was never truly mine." Nathaniel's hand tightened gently around hers. "Then give it back properly." He lifted the ring from its box. The gold glowed faintly in the morning light. "Evelina," he said, voice trembling, "will you wear this again, not as the girl I once loved, but as the woman I've spent every day trying to forget and failing?" She could barely breathe. "And what will you wear, Nathaniel?" He smiled faintly, reaching into his coat pocket and pulling out his half of the ring, the one he had carried through every storm, every battle. The proof that I never truly forgot. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been waiting all along. The metal warmed against her skin, and in that warmth, something inside her healed. Tears spilled down her cheeks, unhidden. "Do you still love me, Nathaniel?" He leaned closer, his voice a whisper that trembled through her. "I never stopped." The morning sun spilled through the window, touching their faces, washing away years of shadow. And as their foreheads met, breath mingling, silence finally gave way to peace. The first light of dawn crept slowly over Ashbourne Manor, painting its gray stones in gold. The storm had passed completely now, the clouds drifting like ghosts dissolving into morning. The sea below the cliffs shimmered with quiet strength, and the wind that once howled with grief now whispered softly through the open windows. The house, long burdened by sorrow, seemed at last to breathe. In the great hall, servants moved quietly, as though aware that something within the very walls had changed. The hearths that had lain cold for years now burned with warmth. Flowers, real living flowers, stood in vases once filled only with dust. Even the portraits along the staircase, with their severe faces and judging eyes, seemed less cruel under the sunlight. Evelina stood in the garden beneath the rose, arch where everything had begun. Her gown was simple, cream-colored, flowing, and her hair fell loose down her shoulders, kissed by the early light. In her hand, she held the ring Nathaniel had given her once more. It gleamed in the sun, warm and alive, as though it had never left her finger at all. The scent of the sea mingled with the roses, the air cool and sweet. She could hear the sound of footsteps on the gravel path, steady and sure. And when she turned, Nathaniel was there, no longer the broken man haunted by memory, but the one she remembered from long ago. The same calm strength in his stride, the same quiet intensity in his eyes. But now there was something new too. Peace. "You always loved this garden," he said, coming to stand beside her. Evelina smiled softly. "Because it's where I learned that beauty doesn't need to be perfect to endure." Nathaniel's gaze lingered on her profile, the sunlight touching her scars, faint, pale, but no longer marks of shame. "Nor love," he said gently. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "You really mean to start over?" "I mean to continue," he replied. "We never truly ended, Evelina. We only paused." For a long moment, they simply stood together in the golden light, the years between them dissolving into the morning mist. The silence was no longer heavy. It was full, alive, content. Evelina turned the ring on her finger, the gold warm against her skin. "I used to think love was something you could lose," she said. "Something fragile, something that disappears if you're not careful." "And now?" he asked. She smiled. "Now I think it's something that waits, patiently, quietly, until we're brave enough to return to it." Nathaniel reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then I'm grateful you were braver than I ever was." A soft breeze stirred her hair. The sea glittered like 1,000 tiny mirrors, each one catching a fragment of light. The world itself seemed to exhale. Nathaniel drew her closer, his voice low but certain. "Evelina, when I lost you, I thought the world had turned to ash. But now, standing here, I realize you weren't my past. You were the life I hadn't learned to live yet." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, not of sorrow, but release. "And you," she whispered, "were the forgiveness I never thought I deserved." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to the ring that now gleamed between them. From the manor balcony, Mrs. Linton watched silently, her eyes softening. "So," she murmured to herself, "the house breathes again." The sunlight spilled fully across the gardens now, chasing the last remnants of shadow. The roses swayed gently in the breeze, and somewhere far off, the bells of the village church began to ring, soft, distant, but full of life. Nathaniel turned to her, his voice a whisper that carried through the still, morning air. "You never did return the ring." Evelina smiled, her fingers tightening around his. "No," she said softly. "I only gave it back to where it always belonged." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch reverent, and for the first time in years she let herself laugh, light, free, unguarded. The camera would have pulled back there, the manor glowing in morning light, the two of them framed by the arch of roses, the Duke who had lost everything, and the woman who taught him how to live again. And as the wind carried the sound of her laughter over the cliffs, a final line lingered, soft, eternal, true. Some love stories do not begin with a promise. They begin with the courage to return what was never truly lost.